Jake Paul is absolutely baffled by Francis Ngannou's decision to pass on replacing Gervonta Davis for a boxing match on Netflix, and he's not holding back his frustration. Paul was initially set to fight Tank Davis in a curious matchup due to the massive size difference between them. However, Davis was pulled from the fight after another civil lawsuit was filed against him for domestic violence. Most Valuable Promotions offered Ngannou the opportunity to step in as a replacement. It wasn't just that the former UFC champion turned down the fight. Ngannou went further, calling the idea disrespectful. Now Paul will face Anthony Joshua instead, another matchup with an interesting size discrepancy as Paul is the smaller man. "Yeah, I just thought, he's just an idiot," Paul said during a media scrum. "I'm like, yo, what are you doing? If you're so confident, if you feel so disrespected, you're having all this bad publicity about your name over the past year and a half, this is your opportunity to correct that and stop me." Paul makes a valid point about Ngannou's recent struggles with public perception. After leaving the UFC in 2022, Ngannou signed with the PFL, which gave him freedom to compete in boxing. He landed 2 huge fights against Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. Ngannou lost both boxing matches, though the Fury fight was extremely competitive, ending in a controversial split decision. Many observers thought Ngannou actually won that fight. Joshua knocked Ngannou out cold in the second round, a devastating finish that raised questions about whether he belonged at the elite level of boxing. After dealing with the tragic death of his son, Ngannou returned to MMA last October for his only fight under the PFL banner. He knocked out Renan Ferreira in the first round, showing he still possesses devastating power when competing in mixed martial arts. The Predator hasn't been in action since that victory, but he's continued making headlines for all the wrong reasons. The PFL has grown increasingly frustrated by his absence from the promotion's Africa-based events, which were supposed to be a major part of his contract. UFC CEO Dana White also recently told a story about Ngannou pushing him and UFC Chief Business Officer Hunter Campbell during a meeting because he was upset about being snubbed for a bonus. That incident paints a picture of someone struggling with emotional control and business relationships. Paul believes Ngannou had the perfect chance to get back on track, not only in the news but also in the ring, by taking the fight on a massive platform like Netflix. The exposure would have been enormous, potentially rehabilitating Ngannou's image and bank account. He's basically also talking about Mike Tyson for fighting me. "Francis, you're nowhere near the legend, and you never will be, even close to the legend of Mike Tyson. And you're saying it's disrespectful to get in the ring." That's a brutal but fair assessment. Mike Tyson is one of the most iconic athletes in history, transcending boxing to become a global cultural phenomenon. Ngannou, despite his UFC success, hasn't reached anywhere near that level of mainstream recognition. For Ngannou to call fighting Paul disrespectful, while Tyson was willing to do it, creates an awkward contradiction. Either fighting Paul is beneath elite combat sports athletes, or it's a legitimate opportunity. You can't have it both ways. Paul's frustration makes sense from a business perspective. He offered Ngannou a high-profile fight on Netflix with massive viewership potential. The payday would have been substantial, the exposure incredible, and a win would have erased recent boxing failures. Instead, Ngannou declined and publicly criticized the offer as disrespectful. That leaves him in limbo, not fighting regularly in either boxing or MMA, while dealing with promotional issues of PFL and public relations problems at PFL. The contrast between Paul's willingness to fight anyone and Ngannou's selective approach is striking. Paul has consistently taken on bigger, more experienced fighters throughout his boxing career. He's faced former UFC champions, professional boxers, and now Anthony Joshua. Ngannou's career trajectory since leaving the UFC has been disappointing. He had all the leverage, signed what seemed like a perfect deal with PFL that allowed boxing freedom, then struggled to capitalize on those opportunities. The tragic loss of his son obviously impacted everything, and nobody can criticize how he handled that personal devastation. But the business decisions and public statements since then have raised serious questions about his judgment. Paul calling him an idiot is harsh, but reflects genuine frustration. From Paul's perspective, he handed Ngannou a lifeline to rebuild his reputation and earning potential, only to get rejected and insulted publicly. Now Paul moves forward with Joshua, a former two-time heavyweight champion with massive name recognition. That fight carries significant risk for Paul, but also enormous upside if he pulls off the upset. For Ngannou, the question becomes, what's next? He's not fighting regularly, his relationship with PFL seems strained, and his boxing career stalled after 2 losses. Turning down Paul may have cost him more than just a payday.